Hello and welcome to Talking Books. I'm Joel de Villiers. Because business is not separate from society, it is important for successful businesses to give back through corporate social investment. But it is not as easy as it may seem to develop a CSI strategy that will make a definitive positive contribution to people's lives. Joining me now is Setlogane Manchidi, Head of CSI at Investec, to talk about his book, Corporate Social Investment, a guide to creating a meaningful legacy. Welcome, Setlogane, and thank you so much for joining us and chatting about your book.
Thank you for having us.
I want to start talking about the difference between their two terms, corporate social investment and corporate social responsibility, which is often confused. What is the difference?
Well, I think it's suffice and important to say corporate social investment is a part of corporate social responsibility. Let's take you back, and just to simplify it, I often want to think about the triple Ps, which is the planet, the people, and your profits, right? And all that is what is captured in corporate social responsibility. What is important is to remember that corporate social responsibility alludes to the ethics, it alludes to how it is that we make our money, it alludes to how it is that we conduct business. Whereas corporate social responsibility investment is more about people injection, what it is that we do for society. It's a bit smaller than just the broad nature of corporate social responsibility.
Okay, so now as a business, I think the very first step that you say you have to take when you want to embark on a strategy, on a CSI strategy, is to ask yourself why. Why do I want to have CSI? Is it because I have to want to be compliant? Is it because I want to do PR? Please tell me about that.
You see, I argue in this book that the motives for doing CSI really impacts how well we're able to do. In fact, it impacts the what and the how we do it. If you do it for compliance purposes alone, the chances are all you're worried about is ticking the box. You don't ask to what extent it makes a difference. If you do it for PR, the first proposal that comes to your desk, all you're asking is what kind of brand exposure am I going to get, as opposed to what kind of difference is it really going to make. Or is it such that, as I call it in here, is it keeping up with the Joneses? Because your competitors are doing it, you also want to be seen to be doing it. In that case, you also, again, don't worry about the difference that it makes. You worry about, well, if company X and company Y are doing it, I cannot be seen not to be doing it. So I have to do it just to keep up with the Joneses. Or you could actually sit back and say, this has a power to make a meaningful difference in society. What we ought to be doing it for is to, in pursuit of this difference. Inevitably, which is very interesting, if you do that, the right thing for the right reasons, all other boxes get ticked.
Now, there's so much that needs to be done in a societal level. Where do you start making your decision as to where you are going to do your corporate social investment?
I think one of the first things, and I allude to it again in the book, is to really think about who are we as an entity? Who do we represent? What we're about? What sector are we in? So I talk about thinking about sectoral alignment, cultural alignment, values alignment. What's the nature of your business? I make examples of being in a financial institution versus being in a business of making or producing food. And these two entities or two different spaces could be a very useful guide to say, where are we best positioned? If we're in the business of food, perhaps we are best positioned to make food provision the focus. If we're in the business of professional services, perhaps we are best positioned to be in the business of developing professionals much better aligned to who we are.
It is not that easy still. You can say, okay, we're in corporate, we're in social, we're in finance, so we want to do it, go into the corporate sector. Or we're in retail, we want to look at food or something like that. But it's still going to take you months, not a day, of sitting with your strategy team to decide on what your CSI strategy is going to be.
Well, again, if you take the approach that I propose in this book, it says ask the why. What are you after first and foremost? Because you can't determine your focus before you determine why it is that you're doing it. If you say, for example, like I make an example of Investec in this particular case, where we said, we're doing this in order to enable as many people to become active economic participants. That's one. Now, if you ask, where do you start in terms of focus to enable people to become active economic participants in society? Education inevitably is the one way. Entrepreneurship is another way. And that's how you arrive at that focus. But first and foremost, you've got to ask the question, why are we doing it and what are we after in the broadest term before you narrow it down to this is what we get. And again, the difficulty is it's very easy to say entrepreneurship and education. Again, there you've got to think about education is such a broad term. In education, I can be talking to you about infrastructure development, and lately, as we often know, pit latrines are an issue. I can be talking about, if you're like me and you come from Limpopo, the delivery of textbooks is another issue. There's just so much. Again, you need to narrow it down, and the only way to narrow it down is to define their objectives and say, what are objectives within education that we see? Then, bit by bit, you get to focus to what it is that you should be doing.
So let's look at Investec as an example,
Yes.
and how you drilled down and narrowed your focus to come up with a bursary scheme.
Yes.
And tell me about that bursary scheme.
So for example, again, the why was, the answer was, we're doing this for a meaningful difference. That's number one. And then we said, what are we seeking to achieve? We're seeking to facilitate opportunities that enable as many people to become active economic participants in society. And then we said, if that's the case, looking at who we are, an entrepreneurial financial institution, and also the fact that we bank professionals and entrepreneurs, we should be looking at developing professionals in whatever shape or form that exists. And that's why we then said, we're going to then have two key objectives. The first one is to increase the number of those who pass with a decent pass in English, maths, and science. That's one, at high school level. And then the second objective that's linked to the first is the extent to which you're going to facilitate access to quality tertiary education, support and nurture, as well as celebrate performance thereafter. And that's it. That's it. We're not oblivious. And this is the most important thing about focus, is that it's not that you're oblivious to the extent of societal needs, but you're narrowing it down to ask, if I look at Investec, where is it that we can best make meaningful contribution? Not only in a form of extending financial contribution, but also by tapping into our human resources. So for example, the bursary program that we run, each and every single bursary recipient is paired with an Investec employee as a mentor. But also I think critical, we could have offered bursaries for any sector. We could have offered bursaries for social work. We could have offered bursaries for medical professions. But again, we had to say, ours is to try and look at for those who are going into the commerce field, because we are best positioned, having a whole host of well-experienced professionals in the commerce field to mentor, to nurture, to guide, and to support people going into that field. And that talks to that alignment again.
And those bursars don't necessarily come and work for you.
No, that's not the point. It is a cherry on top when they are able to come and work for you, but it is that you're not doing this purely for them to come and work for you. What you're understanding here is that you're facilitating an opportunity that they wouldn't have otherwise had. And that's the most important part about what we've got to understand about facilitating inclusion and the power of CSI in facilitating the inclusion of the many who wouldn't otherwise be at the table. And that's important.
So you have a list. It's quite a long list. It's the why, and it's the what. We've now also looked a little bit at the what. But the what can be very confusing because there is so much. And you can, if you don't drill down and focus, like you said now, you can become quite mired in a world of many proposals landing on your desk, and how do you choose which one is the one that you are going to support?
I think the difficulty, and let's accept it. I often, and I say the same in the book, and I say, if you put 101 people in a room and you ask them in the South African context, what keeps them awake at night? There'll be 101, if not 102, if not 103, or 303, or 404. Very legit causes. And how do you then choose a verse? And all of them are deserving of support. I think the most important thing is, again, the basis on which it is the why, and then the premise that says we're after this, and because we're after this, these are going to be our key objectives. Here, no single entity, corporate or otherwise, should ever be expected to solve the country or the world's problems. It is just not a fair expectation. And that's when you actually realize how disempowering it can be, because if you you spread yourself way too thin, even your chances of impact are going to be very thin.
Now, another one that you look at is with whom?
Yes.
With whom are you going to do this?
Yeah.
And to whom, hey?
Yeah.
Or for whom? For whom?
For whom?
For whom?
Yes.
With whom and for whom?
I think the for whom is also part and parcel of defining the what. It's an extension of the what. So if you're saying I'm facilitating, I'm playing in education, and I'm facilitating these opportunities, you've got to think about the for whom. Who are you targeting? Is it the youth? Which kind of youth? And one of the other difficulty I often say in CSI is we've got to understand the opportunity costs associated with this. We're spending X rand here, and if we're not guaranteed of some form of return there, we actually would have lost that X rand to have been able to facilitate yet another meaningful opportunity. And that's the difficulty. You know, I say to them all the time, in CSI, we've got to say no more than we can say yes. That's a harsh reality because we don't have a bottomless pit financially with which to make this difference. Now, when we talk for whom, and as difficult as it may be, is we have to be very selective. So let me give you a classical example. There's so many people deserving of bursaries. We could send hundreds of people without even meeting them to go to university. But what's the guarantee without applying some form of selection rigor of ensuring that the 12 million or so that we spend annually in bursaries is going to be well used and not going to be money down the drain? It is, you've got to carefully select your beneficiaries. Not because you're trying to say, you know, one is better than the other, but you understand that it takes attitude. It takes a special kind of person who comes from the circumstances of people that we're really trying to target to make it the other end. Otherwise, you're actually fooling yourself. And that, it's a toughest thing to do because the dilemma in selection is giving somebody an opportunity who doesn't deserve it and denying somebody who deserves it.
And when we look at this, we're not looking at a short-term plan. We're looking at a very long-term plan, actually.
Yes.
And when you talk about return on investment, it's more not necessarily the money, but the social impact.
You know, I talk again in the book, for those who are very interested in buying the book. I say there's a tendency to have a microwave approach in CSI. And I say the microwave approach is you put something in the microwave for 5 minutes, it's hot again, you take it out, it's hot again, in the next 5 minutes it's cold again. And that's not how it's going to have to work in CSI. In CSI, you've got to be in it for the long haul. And that's why, for example, with Investec CSI, there are a number of programs that celebrate 10-year anniversary. And people ask, what? 10 years doing the same thing? It's like, what is the issue if the same thing is delivering better results? That's the issue. What you got to do is to try and do something for a year or two. It's very difficult to assess the extent to which it's making a meaningful difference. But equally so, it's very different when you do something for a longer term because every single time and as every year passes, there's amazing opportunity to strengthen that model and give it a much better chance of being more impactful.
Wow. Wow, thank you. Setlogane, thank you so much for coming in and sharing that with us. And we've only touched on what is in the book. So if you want to go into CSI, you want to develop a good CSI strategy, this is the book to get to really help you on your way. Just a reminder, my guest is Setlogane Manchidi, head of CSI at Investec, and his book is Corporate Social Investment, a guide to creating a meaningful legacy. And that was it for this edition of Talking Books. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.